Yo, boys, join the Zoom. Are you can? 2 participants. Pardon? Hello. Hello, my name is Zhehai. I'm the mentor for this Python workshop. We're gonna wait a few more minutes and we're just gonna get started with just like setting up Python and stuff. Of course. Oh, I can see that. Cool. Okay, so let's get started with Python. The first thing you gotta do is download it. So, what I usually do for Python, so Python is really versatile because it's a great beginner programming language, and there's a lot of builds for it. What I recommend is to download something that's not as recent, so like 3.77, because those are more stable and you can use more modules, which I'll be maybe talking about later. So for now, just like download any of these files. So for example, if you're running a 64-bit laptop or computer, I run the 64-bit one because then you would have more memory and storage to work with. So let's say we download this. So when you're installing Python, one important fact is you want to add Python 3.8 to path. Just really important to add it as an environmental variable, so you'll be able to use it for many other applications later on in the future, and you just click install. So that's really simple for the Python installation. All right. So once you have Python installed, let's actually get started in like the programming portion of it. So before we get started in like actual code syntax, let's first take a look at what this whole screen is. So how I opened this up was I opened my search. Oh, you guys can't really see it because it's on my other monitor. But I search up idle, so IDLE. And it will say Python idle 64-bit or 32-bit. You click on that, and this shell will open up right over here. So what this shell does is where you're going to be running your programs. It's not where you're going to be like editing your programs or making your programs, but it's where you'll be able to see your output and where you'll be putting in your input, which we'll be talking about later as well. So in order to create a new file, what you need to do is you just click File and New File over here. And what should pop up is a text editor with it saying Untitled. So this is going to be our first Python project. So I encourage you guys to code this with me while I'm doing this. So the first thing I'm going to introduce is something called commenting. Commenting is something inside your code, sort of like a note or like a comment you want to leave in your program, so then you can leave it for other people to read. And the code, when you run the code, Python just skips over that comment. So it's just there for you to read and like understand what the project is about. So in order to start a comment, you got to do hashtag. You'll see that it'll turn red. You can call this is our first Python project. And you click enter a few times, and that's going to be your comment in this Python project. So before we even run it, we're going to have to save this first. So Control S over here. And I'll just save it over here. I'll call it Python workshop. So it's saved over here. Okay. So now that we have it saved, let's first figure out what we're going to do by like how we're going to output things in Python, right? So the first thing I'm going to be teaching you guys is something called print. And the reason why I like Python so much is that it's really intuitive with its naming. So print, for example, obviously it would be printing or outputting something, right? So to print something, you have to have these two brackets over here, and inside the brackets, you're gonna put in these two brackets, which is gonna be where we're gonna be putting our message. So hello world. So what this does is it prints the message in here, which would be, in this case, just hello world. So to run a program, what I like to do is click F5, or what you can do is click run and run module over here. It's going to ask you to save the source because you need to save your code before you run it. And the thing I was talking about earlier, the idle, it's going to open up and it's going to print out hello world. So the three triangle lines you see over here show that the program has ended and our program has executed. So what we did over here was we just printed a string. It was a string because we encased hello world with brackets, right? So what you can do is, that's one type of data structure over here, which is a string. There are other types of data structures we'll be looking at. So for example, integers, floats, booleans. Let's get into that first. So now that we know how to print things, you guys can experiment with this. Try printing out different pieces of text. Like, I don't know, some random pieces of text over here. So what happens when you run this, click that 5 for that, it prints hello world, and then the next print statement goes on the next line. So that's a really key feature of print. It doesn't print it right after the hello world. It prints it on a new line over here. So that's just for output. So I'm going to make a new comment over here called output. All right. So now what if you want to store variables? So you want to store information and be able to compute that information and then output it to the user. So for this case, we're going to use something called variables. And what variables do they are used to hold information for later. So these variables can be used to assign a value and then carry out a task later on. So to make a variable, you could call it any name as long as it's a string. So for example, X, it could be like num of apples. It could be anything. But what you need to make sure to do is to assign a variable, you set it equal to something. So in this case, I would set X equal to something we were going to be printing out. So for example, a string. So hello world. So what I did over here was I set X, which is a variable, equal to a string. So variables don't just store strings over here. They also store other types of things like I was talking about. So for example, so I'm going to say this is storing a string variable. And this one's going to be storing a integer variable. So num of apples is going to equal, instead of putting a string, I'm going to put in a number like 4. So what this does is it sets num of apples, which is going to be a variable, equal to the integer 4. So now that we've stored variables, we still need to figure out how to output them and how to process them, right? So it's really easy to print out a variable. All you need to do is use your print. And inside the brackets, instead of putting in the string like hello world or hi, 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 you can put the name of that actual variable without the quotations. So just like X or print num of apples. So I'm going to run F5. And what happens is hello world is printed. Hi, hi, hi is printed. Then I made my X equal to hello world, and I print out X, which is going to be hello world. And I set num of apples equal to 4. So when I print num of apples, it will also print out the number 4. So that's the very basics of variables. But what can you do with them? Because like all I'm doing right now is just storing them using my hands, right? Like I'm just typing it out. But what if I want to like perform operations on it? So for example, in this case, we're going to be learning about operations. So there's many operations. I'm just gonna list them out over here. So there's addition. So an example of addition would be using num of apples. Actually, instead I'll make a new variable called num. And I'll say 5 plus 5. So in this case, num will be equal to 10. And we can verify this by printing out num. And it'll print out 10 for us. So that's addition. And well, there's also addition, and I'm pretty sure you guys know about the other stuff, right? So there's going to be subtraction. So num is equal to 10 minus 9. In this case, it will be equal to -1. There's going to be multiplication. Num is equal to, let's use the numbers 2 times 3. So you can't use the x because x in this case could mean a variable, it can mean different things. So that's why we use the asterisk on top to make it multiplication. We got division. Is equal to 100 divided by 5. You guys got the gist of it. There's a lot of other operations out there. So for example, there's percent, which just takes the remainder. So remainder, let's say num is equal to 10 mod 3. So in this case, the remainder would be 1. So if you try printing num over here, what's going to happen is, even though we set num equal to 10 minus 9, num is equal to 2 times 3, num is equal to 100 divided by 5, and num is equal to 10 mod 3, it only prints out the last answer. And this is because when we're running code, Python interprets everything line by line. So on the first line, it skips the comments, it prints out the hello world. And even though we set num equal to all these different types of numbers, and even though we perform so many operations on it, it gets overwritten every single time we set num equal to something. So when we print num out at the end, this is the only answer that gets printed out. So if we want to print out everything, we're going to have to make it sequentially. So we're going to have to add it here, add it here, add it here, add it here. Basically add it everywhere after you perform an operation. Okay. So once that we have this set up, we're just operating with variables with the integer type. So right now, this is just the integer type. So what about the strings? Can we use all of these operations on strings as well? Well, you can, but only for some of them. So for example, if you wanted to add 2 strings together, right? You could do that by adding the strings together. So I'll call this string. Get ourselves some space to work with. So I'm going to call my variable this time string. And it's going to equal one thing. So hello. And I'm going to add another string to it. So what this does is just adds these 2 strings together. And when I print it out, so I call that variable name, run F5, it'll print out the 2 strings added together. Notice how I added, there's no space in between them because I didn't add a space over here. So what I could do is I could add a space over here, or there's another type of way to join strings, but you're going to have to do it in here. Hello, comma, world. So what that does is, just like a comma in real life, you know, when you're typing in sentences, hello world, there's always going to be a space over here. So the comma just joins 2 strings together, but adds a space in between them. So those are 2 ways to add strings together. What about multiplying strings? You can do that as well. So if I just want to print, I don't have much vocabulary, so this is the only thing I know how to use. Hello. I'm just gonna multiply by 10. So what this is gonna do is it's just gonna print hello, but times 10. So if I run this, see over here we have hello, 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 hello 10 times. Okay. So we're going to add a comment over here. Prints hello 10 times. Okay, so that's enough with operations for strings. You can't really subtract a string. You can't really divide a string because that would be weird. These are like the basic operations you can do with strings. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit more about variable types. Just to recap the variable types that we've learned so far. Another way of commenting, since I'm tired of using hashtag, which only goes for one line, I'm going to comment multi-line. So what that does is I'll be able to write a bunch of text, and then the code will skip that comment through multiple lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a multi-line string, just floating in space, using 3 of these quotation marks. So anything I type in here will be green and will be ignored by Python. So the first, the 2 variable types we already know are string, which we know we can use by using quotations. We know integer, which is basically a number that's not a decimal. So like 5, 6, -10, -4, those type of things. We have float. So float is something that I haven't taught you guys yet, but just essentially like decimals, 10.1, that type of stuff. We have string. Oh, we already did string, my bad. We have Boolean. So a Boolean is it only has true or false. And we'll see those in action right now. So let's make a float. So a common example of a float would be a price. And I'll call this price of phone or something. And the price of phone is going to be, I don't know, it's the price of a phone, 500.24. So that's an example of a float. You can put as many decimal places as you want. You can even do this as well. You can do this as well. But a float and an integer, they can sort of interchange when you're performing operations on them. I'll explain what that means later on. And a Boolean is going to be something like this. What's a normal Boolean we do every day? Did laundry. Did I do the laundry? True. Or I could say, did laundry is false. You know that it's a Boolean when you type in true and false, when that thing that pops up is all orange. Oh yeah, guys, I just wanted to say, if you have any questions you want to ask, don't hesitate to ask in the chat. And then we've got some helpers out here, and they'll be able to help you out if you have any problems running the code or any errors you see. All right. Okay. So now how are you going to, so the next thing we have to do with variable types, right, is actually converting these types, because you need to learn how to convert between different types of variables inside your programs. So for example, let's say I had an integer, 5, and then a float num, 5.5. I could print integer plus float num. And let's see what happens. So I'm going to comment all of this out because I don't want to see all of the things we wrote in the start by moving the quotations from the bottom all the way to the top. So all this is commented out, and this is the only part that we're going to be looking at. I'm going to save the code. And when I run this, it gets 10.5. So the cool thing about Python is that it can, even though integer and float are two different types, they'll be able to convert it seamlessly when you print it out or when you add them together. So when an integer is added with a float, obviously the answer will become a float. All right. So if you want to explicitly convert them, what you're gonna do is you'll be able to use some things called sort of like typecasting. Okay. So let's say this integer was a string. If I want to convert this to an actual integer, I could use this int and then cover it up. What this does is converts any variable type to integer. By just covering that, it'll convert it into an integer. The same thing goes for float as well. So how do you think we're going to be able to convert float? We'll be able to use float, which is going to turn purple. And then let's say we want to convert this string right over here to a float. This will convert the float string. This will convert the string into a float. All right. So the same thing goes for a string as well. Let's say I wanted to convert. Let's first put the comment on over here. Converts any variable type to float. Let's make another string called cool string, and this time it's going to be just a bunch of integers. But we're going to turn it into a string by using str. So it tries to convert it to the best of its abilities, but it isn't fully, doesn't always like work properly. For example, you can't just convert something that isn't an integer into an integer. So if I tried doing something like this, integer over here, but I'll add a few random strings after it. Or actually, yeah. If I tried turning this string into an integer, it shouldn't work because what happens is it'll say invalid literal int with base 10. So it couldn't convert the string into an integer because it had a bunch of different characters that it can't convert. So you'll be able to see those errors if you try to convert them. I'll comment that out for now. Okay. Okay, so now that we learned how to convert types, let's try also taking in input because I haven't taught you guys that yet. Okay, so let's just make a new doc. So I'm going to control N and make a new file because that one's a little bit bloated up now. So let's say we wanted to print out whatever the user is writing in. So a program that will take in user input and output. So all this does is just repeats whatever the user is saying. I'm going to save it first. Call it input. So to do input, it's as easy as it sounds. It's called input. But you can't just call it input. You have to set it equal to a variable So then whatever the user types in will be set to that variable. So I'll call this, I'll call it text. I'll call this variable text field is equal to input, open bracket, please enter a message. So what input does is whatever's inside this bracket, it outputs it out, and then it asks the user to type something in. Input takes in a string, so this text field will automatically become a string data type variable. All right. And if you want to print out whatever the person said, we would print out text field. Let's run this. And it says, please enter a message. So I'll say, hello, my name is Zhehai. And what it prints out is, hello, my name is Zhehai. So cool. That's really it for input. But what if you want to ask for, like, let's say, the number of apples you have? Please enter the number of apples. And let's just print it out like this. And I'll take in 56. It prints out 56, but what does this 56 actually mean? Since input takes in a string, this 56 will actually be a string. But that's not really what we want to work with. We want to work with an integer, right? So what we can do is, from what we learned in the previous doc, where we convert a string into an integer. So what we can do is say text field is equal to int text field. So what I can do instead is put it directly onto the input. So I'll wrap int all around the input, not around the comments. So when the input takes the string, it will directly convert it into an integer, making it something we can use. So we can say text field is equal to text field plus or minus 1. And what that'll do is it'll give us one less apple than we had before when we entered it in. So if we click F5, run it, I'd say enter 5, it'll print out 4 because we subtracted 1 before going into the next step. So when printing, you can also add in like strings and text as well. So what I can do is I can add comma is the number of apples, or yeah, the number of apples after I eat one. So if I can enter 100 or something, or 1,000, 100, 99 is the number of apples after I eat one. Cool. How's our time looking? Okay, 2:30. Yeah, we got lots of time. Okay. So that's just the basics of inputs, variable types, converting types. You guys saw some basic operations. I didn't cover all of them. There's 2 more I want to talk about. So let's go back to basic operations. Right over here. So I talked about remainder. I also want to talk about integer division. Oops, I put a $sign. I also want to talk about exponent. Okay. Integer division, it just sounds exactly what it is. So if I try to divide something like 3 divided by 2, but I don't want to float because 3 divided by 2 will give me 1.5, right? If I just want it to be an integer and round it to the nearest integer, what I can do is I can add a slash. So 3/2 will just give me the integer. Sort of like when you divide and then you find the remainder, the integer division will just give me that, it'll just give me that number. So in this case, it will equal 1. And exponent one is also really easy. To put something to the power, like let's say 2 to the power of 3 or to the exponent 3, I put 2 asterisks and 2 to the 3. In this case, it will equal 8. Yep. So those are the operations you can perform. You can take an input, you can take an output. So input over here, printing the text field. You know how to manipulate variables. I'm going to uncomment this now so it looks a bit more readable. Oh, I want this to be commented though. Yep. So you know about the most basic variable types. You know how to multiply operations. Those are the basics for you to get started with Python. Okay. So now that we have that set, what we want to talk about next is if statements, because you want to actually have logic, right? So let's make a new text file, and we'll call this if statements. If you guys want, I can send you guys the files that I'm writing down. If you weren't able to copy it down, or if you guys want to copy it down, you guys can look in the live stream later on when it has ended. Also, I'm always available on Discord, so if you guys need any help with setting up Python or starting up with Python, I'll be there to help you guys. Just putting that out there. Okay, so for if statements, let's say we wanted to make a mark program, right? That just gives you the user inputs a mark, and then they tell you if it's an A, B, C, or like, I don't know, a fail, right? So we're gonna make a program called a program that takes the user's mark and outputs the letter grade. Really simple, and we'll do this with if statements. So the first thing we need to do is take an input, right? So I'll call this mark as my variable, and I'll set it equal to my input that I'm going to be taking. So I'll call this, please enter a mark. All right. But one thing we need to remember is that mark isn't going to be a string because input default takes in a string. So we're going to have to convert it to a float because marks are usually in float format and in decimal format. So now that mark is a float, now we need to actually look at logic and print out the answer. So I'm going to say the answer. Actually, I'm just going to print it out at the end over here. So print ans, comma, is the mark you got. Or is the letter grade you got. So in here, we're going to be doing the logic. So to do an if statement, it's really simple. It would be if your statement and then colon. So what are some types of statements you can use in Python? So some statements that are really simple are equal comparisons. So I'm gonna say if mark is equal to 100 colon, I click enter, you'll notice that I'm now indented. So I'm not on this level anymore. I'm on this indent level. If mark is equal to 100, I'm going to print, wow, you're a Schulich scholar. Because you're so great. So that's an if statement right over here, just to show you how you guys do that. So that's the that's the, what's the actual terms for it? Give me a second, guys. Okay, there we go. I'll call it an equal statement. All right. The other type of statement we have is, yeah, I should probably just comment it out over here so it'll be easier. Before we even go into logic, we're just gonna talk about the different types of statements. So equals equals compares between two of the same variable types. If the two variable types are equal, it will send out a value called true, and it will execute the code that is indented. What if you want to see if it doesn't compare? So if it's not equal, we'll use something called exclamation mark equals. And this compares between two of the same variable types. Return true if equal. Return true if not equal. So there's not just equals equals and not equals. There are other types, including less than, less than or equal to, greater than, those type of things. So this one compares between, if I put up some placeholder variables, so A is less than B, compares if A is less than B. It will output true. A is less than B. Pretty self-explanatory. The same thing goes for the other ones. I don't really think I have to explain these to you guys. Less than or equals to B just means that A could equal B, and that would represent true. Or if A is less than B. So for example, in this case, if B was equal to 5, A could be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, etc. Right? As long as it's less than or equal to B. I mean, as long as A is less than or equal to B. Oh, don't even know what happened there. Okay. Yep. So these are the comparison statements. Comparison operators. All right, so now we have the comparison operators. Let's actually do the code over here. So the if statement starts off the logic. All right. What we can do is you can say if mark is, so we're gonna first do the 90 to, actually no, 80 to 100 would be an A, right? So we do A 80 is less than or equal to mark, which is less than or equal to, or just less than 100. And in this case, our answer would be A. So let's make another variable called answer is equal to nothing right now. You just want to make sure, we know it's a string though. So if A is less than or equal to mark, which is less than 100, I'll say ans is equal to A. Right? And I'll do another one called if. I don't really know what B, the range of B is. I think that's just 60 or maybe just 70. And I'll just do 60 for now. You don't want those two overlapping. And it's equal to B. And 50. Yep. Okay. Perfect. Less than or equal to mark, which is less than 60. My answer is C. And lastly, if mark is less than 50, answer is equal to fail. All right, and I can print my answer out here at the end. So I run this. If I enter the mark 91, A is the letter or grade you got, right? However, I'm just using the if statements over here, right? So what happens is, in Python, it checks this first if statement. If it's false, it'll go to the next if statement. If it's false, it'll go to the next if statement. But what happens is, if I make them all ifs, it will look at every single statement until one of them is true. Or if none of them are true, it'll just skip it and print out the answer, which is going to be blank. So what we can do instead is look at a different type of if statement called an elif statement. An elif statement is sort of like a sentence where you're saying if the mark isn't 100, then we'll look at if the mark is within 80 and 100. So that means that if mark is 100, if this statement is true, it will skip this elif statement and go on to the next if statement. And that saves a lot of time when you're programming, because you don't want your program to always check every single if statement. If all of the if statements are asking about one single question, you want it so when you answer one of the questions, you don't need to answer all of the other questions. So by making everything elif, the moment one is true. So for example, let's say my mark was entered to be 75. It would first check this if statement. Since 75 is not equal to 100, it'll go to the next if statement. Since 75 is not within 80 and 100, it'll go to the next statement. The moment that this statement is true, which it is, it'll automatically skip this elif and this elif because it's already satisfied one of the if statements. Before, when we had them all as if statements, it would check every single question, even if you got one of them right. In this case, when you get one of the questions right, you skip all the other if statements. We can even make this a little bit smarter, because right now our work isn't as good as we want, because we're asking a lot of redundant information. So for example, what if I just said if mark is equal to 100, I'll say ans is equal to a plus plus, because that'll be the mark. Instead of saying if mark is greater than or equal to 80 and less than 100, I'm gonna just say if the mark is greater than or equal to 80, because if it was greater than or equal to 80, it's automatically an A, right? And if it was 100, it'll print this one out and it'll skip the other if statements. So that means I don't even need to worry about the upper bound. I just need to worry about the lower bound. So if I do something like this, I can solve all my problems. For example, 75, and B is the letter grade I got, because that's the only bound I need to check for. The last type of statement is, let's say you have all of these statements, right? But if none of these work, let's say like the user entered, I don't know, a string or something, right? You could use the else statement, and this requires nothing else. Like if everything else fails, we're going to this. And this is equal to, what did you even input? So if all of this fails, like for example, let's say like if someone got a mark of this, oh, actually that would not work because of our bounds. What we could do is instead for else would be, we don't really need an else statement here because we cover all of the marks already, right? So what we can do is make this an else statement, because we know that if they don't enter anything, we know that if they enter something within 80 and 100, it's an A. If it's within 60 and 80, it's a B. If it's within 50 and 60, it's a C. And everything else, it'll be a fail, right? So that's why we'll be able to do answers equal to fail. So if I enter something like 45, fail is the letter grade you got. Even though it's not really like a letter grade, it'll be a fail. Okay. So that's just like really simple if statement stuff. What else do I need to cover for you guys? So what you guys can do is, let's say you guys want to do more than just one type of logic, right? You guys can make more if statements inside. So for example, I could say if something happens. Make another if statement. If something happens. If something happens. So I can make a lot of if statements that are all nested together. Just to show you guys, there isn't really any good logic here when it just comes to taking in one input, which would be your mark. But if you're making a more complex program, you probably need to use nested if statements. Okay. The last thing we're going to be talking about are loops. I think, and that should be it for your basic programming stuff. So let's make a new text file. Let's call this loops. So there are, if I remember correctly, I think there's like 3 types of loops out there. There's the for loop, there's the while loop, and there's like the for each loop. And what are loops? Loops are for when you want to run your code multiple times within like a specific time frame. So for example, if I wanted to print out every number from 1 to 100, what I could do is I could do for I in range 1, 100, 1, or just 1, 101. Yeah. Print I. I'll explain to you guys what that means in just a second. So I just printed out all the numbers from 1 to 100. So how does this work? So to initiate a for loop, I use the for statement. Next is the I. What I does is it's just like a variable. I could call this number. I could call this anything, honestly. But what happens is when I say in range, num will go through the ranges of 1 all the way to 101. And I print out that num to show that num is actually increasing every time it goes through the program, right? So what's the ranges of range? Because you notice how I did 1 and then 101, right? So the ranges work like this. The first input would be the start. The last part would be the end. But it doesn't end specifically at 101. It ends right before. I know it's kind of weird, but that's how it works. So what I could do instead is just put in 100. This will make it run 100 times. But you'll notice something really interesting about the number. It starts at 99, and it actually starts at 0. So if you don't actually specify a start and an end, it will just start at 0, and it will go all the way up to the number right before 100. So in fact, it will actually run 100 times, even though it goes from 0 to 99. So this is just for a normal loop. This is for one type of parameter. So one type of parameter where you just put in a number like 100 or 50, and it would print out or it would run the for loop 50 times, right? The second type would be 2 type of parameter. 2 types. This is the one I was demonstrating earlier on, whereas for num in range, a 1 or like a 0, 50. This does the same thing, except it actually specifies a start and an end. Okay, these for loops are great for numbers and for running code multiple times. What about if you want to skip numbers? So for example, I just want to print out all of the even numbers from 0 to 100. What I could do is for num. So this would be 3 types of parameters. Where before num, range, and I'm going to put 3 types of parameters in here. It's going to be a start, it's going to be an end, and it's going to be something that skips every n. So this would be every 2. If I print num, it's going to run 3 times. So I'm going to comment all these out because I don't want them to run. And let's see what happens. It printed out every even number because what happened was num started at 0. Then because of this increment, it will jump to 2, then 4, 6, 8, 10, all the way to 100, and it will stop right before 101. So start, end, and the interval, or whatever you guys want to call it. Cool. So that's for for loops. A lot of interesting things you can do about those. All right, how much time do we have left? Oh, we have 9 minutes left. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the while loop next. The while loop is exactly like it sounds like. It'll keep on printing, or it'll keep on running that piece of code until a condition has been fulfilled. So let's say I have a variable called I, and I'll set it equal to 0. And I'll say while I is less than 50. I'm going to add I plus 1. So I is going to increase 1 every single time. I'm going to print I as well. So what's going to happen is this loop will keep on running until I is greater than 50. So I run this. See how it starts from 1 and then it goes all the way till 50 and it stops. So that's essentially for it for a while loop. And it doesn't just work for like numbers as well, right? You can also do strings as well. So while a string is not equal to something, this is really good if you want the user to input something. Like let's say we wanted to make a piece of code where the user can't leave the loop until he enters the password. So password is equal to MasseyHacks. And I'll say while, and I'll make another thing called field is equal to that. And while field is not equal to password. I'll take an input right here. So field is equal to input password. What's going to happen here is it's going to keep on running this until you enter the right password. I'll print you got it when you have entered it. So if I run this, password, hi. Enter whatever I want. And it won't work because this loop will keep on running until I enter the right password, which is MasseyHacks. The moment I do that, the loop stops because now the field is equal to password, which is incorrect. So the while loop will stop running. So that's a pretty cool implementation of the while loop. And the last thing I want to talk about is the for each loop. The for each loop is really similar to the for loop, but instead of doing in range, you're going to do it in an actual type. So let's say we have a string called OK Boomer, right? And we want to print out every single character within that string. I can say for character in string. So what happens is I can print out character, and it will print out every single character within that string. So if I run this, enter the password, I should have just commented it out. It'll print out OK, then the space, boomer. So print out every single character on every single line because of this print statement. So yeah, that's essentially it for the for each loops. 5 minutes left. One thing I want to talk about is for the 3 types of parameters, you can also go negative as well. So for example, I can make this 100, make this -1, and I can make this -2. just to show that it can also go down as well. All right. So that's about it for you to get started with Python. I feel like loops, manipulating variable types, these are all things you can do to get started with your programming journey in Python. Now, let's say you accidentally made a code that always loops forever and ever. So for example, let's say I made something called while true. That means that while true is true, which it always will be true, it will keep on printing hi. Your password. You're like, oh no, how do I stop this? It's always running, right? So one thing you can do is just close the tab, close the idle. It says program is running, do you still want to kill it? I can kill it. And if I want to see the idle tab again, I can just click F5 and it will be back here. Let's say you don't want to close the idle. Let's say hi is always running and you want to stop it. What you can do is there is something called interrupt execution called Control-C. So if I just click Control-C, which I did on my keyboard, it'll keyboard interrupt and it will stop the program and you'll be able to edit it. So what I was talking about modules earlier was actually before modules, let's say you guys wanted help on like a certain type of command, right? One really useful feature that Python has is called help. So if you want help on some type of keyword, you type in print, for example. Let's look at what print tells me. So help will tell me about print and how you can print values. There's different types of things you can do after the words, like special features you can do with print. You can do help input. And it'll tell me all about input. See, it reads a string from the standard input, all those types of things. So the help function is really useful for if you don't know what a program is, or you can just search it up on Stack Overflow, search it up in Python documentation. One other thing I want to talk about is actually importing modules. So that's the last thing I'm going to be talking about. So chances are, if you guys want to import things, you're just going to have to use different types of libraries and different types of things that are not included in normal Python. So for example, if I wanted to make a game in pygame, if you guys type up pygame, you guys see that pygame is a sort of graphics part of Python. You can do like a lot of graphics things and you can make graphic games. What you can do is, if you like, pygame doesn't come along with Python, right? You have to import it. So what you have to do is you go into your command prompt, you type in pip3 and install the name of the module you want to install. So in this case, it would be install pygame. And pygame is super thick, so it'll run this cool thing. Install pygame. And if you want to use pygame in your code, all you need to do is to import pygame. And then you'll be able to use all the code that pygame has. So that's it for my lesson. Hope you guys learned something from it. If you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to DM me on Discord, and I'll be able to help you guys. I got some knowledge with Discord bots and stuff, so if you guys need help with that, I got you. So hopefully you guys learned something and have fun coding.